All right. Hello, everyone. It's funny because no matter what I do, I tell it no monetization, no commercials. It always plays a commercial, at least for me, when I go to try to grab the link. And last week, it was a commercial for some kind of a birth control thing, and this woman's voice comes on, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Kara, and I love making love." I'm like, and it was live. I was like, oh man.
That's crazy.
It's just the way it goes sometimes. But I'm ready for it today. Not going to let it happen. All right, where's the link? There you are. Hey, everybody. As usual, getting the link to send out to social media. We will not be hearing from our good friend Kara, the birth control ad lady, today. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch last week's episode. All right. All right, let's get the logo up. I do at least have a logo. Come on. Photos, logo, there it is. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start here in just a couple minutes. We'll wait for some more folks to join in, and then I'll introduce my guest today, and we're going to get on with it. Breezy here today.
Yeah, it's coolish too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, and that dew point being lower, like you mentioned, we got it up here, and I'm ready for the hot and muggy myself. That's just, once winter's over, that's it. Bring on the heat and humidity. I don't know about 96 though. I saw that.
It was, but the one on the day it was 96, it wasn't super crazy humid, but we had a lot of days of 90 with dew points 76.
Yeah.
Which is,
That was enough.
Midsummer
Sure.
dew points, so crazy. But, days are shorter than midsummer, so it was better in the evening.
All right, so we're going to get started here. Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Stott of HurricaneTrack.com here. Welcome to another edition of the live broadcast that we call Hurricane U. Your opportunity here to be educated about all things hurricanes, where we dig in depth to some of these topics that we've been going over, from aircraft reconnaissance to computer models, and today we're going to jump into hurricane preparedness. We talked about long-range forecasting and teleconnections and things like that with Ben Knoll recently. And today I am very excited to bring on somebody that I have known for a long time, back even when I was in college. That's when I first learned of this gentleman. He was down in Florida, and that's where he is now, reporting at... was it CBS, Bryan, that you were working for then, or NBC?
NBC.
I can hear him, and we'll bring him on in a second. So that was Hurricane Andrew, and many of you know him because of Hurricane Andrew. The world got to know him, I think, because of that. And since then, he's done work with CBS Evening News. Of course, he was at the Weather Channel for some time, and now he's down at WPLG in Florida, in Miami. And who is it? It is Bryan Norcross. Let's get the iPad to cooperate here if we can. Bingo. Bryan, welcome to Hurricane U. Thanks for joining me.
Mark, thanks. Great to be with you.
All right. So just real quick, I did a little bit of an attempt there to go through your career and how I got to know you. So you were in Miami in 1992 for Andrew, and you've done a lot of other things since then. So just a real quick bio and update on what Bryan Norcross is up to these days.
Well, as you said, I'm a hurricane specialist here at WPLG, which is, by the way, where I started in Miami in 1983 doing the weather. So I'm kind of back to the same station, although obviously now we're 37 years past it, and so a lot of things have changed. There are still a few people still at the station, and that's great. Although it's a new building, it's generally a new place. So that's what I do most of the time, but I also do a variety of things on the side. As you know, I do podcasts during hurricane season, and I do some writing. I write for the Washington Post and also on local10.com, which is the WPLG website. And I have my website, HurricaneIntel.com, that is a place that people can get the latest advisory kind of in a compacted sense whenever there's a storm active, and that site also tweets out the advisory, as you've seen, and we're working to make that site do more for this hurricane season, so that's a work in progress. So I have lots of projects going on. Yeah,
2 books you've done. I got one of them right here, and I think you have both copies in your office there, right? So yep, he's written books.
There's the one you have, right? And so that was 2007.
Right.
By the way, a lot of the information in there is not valid anymore.
Yeah, really.
Because times changed since 2007.
Exactly.
And then 2017, the 25th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew.
Right.
I wrote my Hurricane Andrew story, which I still talk about. I still get a lot of questions about. People are still buying the book on Amazon, so that's pretty accurate as far as I know, as far as the current situation and current information. So anyway, that was a really interesting project to kind of take my mind back to 1992 and the years before that. So the book is about the time before Andrew, the planning for the possibility of a hurricane, and then having this hellacious, unbelievable hurricane happen to us there with very, very little notice.
Right.
When you think back on that, it became a hurricane, like Category 1 hurricane, kind of exactly 2 days before it hit.
2 days.
And it was a tropical storm the day before that. And the day before that, the hurricane hunters could not find a circulation. So, technically it would have been a potential tropical cyclone in today's parlance. So anyway, it's Andrew, there's still many, many lessons from Andrew that are really important for today.
That's true, and Andrew was a big key in my life. That at the time in college I was studying music, and I thought that music would be my career, and some type of earth science, maybe meteorology would be some type of a hobby. Maybe I would just chase hurricanes and do it as a hobby. And I think Andrew was a big tipping point for me that, something about it captivated me. I was in college, and I looked at the potential of maybe taking some meteorology where I was going to school. And as they say, though, it was all because of a girl I met who became my wife. I was going to go to NC State and change from music to meteorology. I got accepted at NC State. I was going to do Mississippi State University for broadcast, maybe, but I stayed in Wilmington for the girl. UNC Wilmington doesn't have meteorology. They have geography. That was the closest thing. Here I am. But Andrew was a big catalyst. And Andrew, that leads me into our discussion today, which is the most important asset and aspect of this. You being the asset here, Andrew really taught you a lot, taught us all a lot as a nation. So the topic today is preparedness. So when we think about hurricane preparedness, I think we think of checklists, things we have to do, things we have to buy. And it's this wheel that goes into motion. So let's just start off with, in your mind and in your experiences, what does it mean to be hurricane prepared? What do we talk about when we talk about preparedness versus mitigation, which is an entirely different subject? It really is. So let's just focus on preparedness.
Well, there are 2 steps to preparedness as opposed to mitigation, but the first step is really nothing physical, it's really mental. It's really thinking about and imagining what you would do if, right? And now, this is how actually I started studying hurricanes, even though I was doing the weather here in Miami. We weren't, Miami and South Florida never thought about hurricanes in the 80s, ever. Right. It was not part of life to really think about the possibility of a hurricane. Hurricane season came and went year after year after year, and nothing really happened. And so it was really out of mind at that at that point. But I started studying the history of Miami because as part of my weathercast, which was on location every day, I would do it at historical locations. And so I would be studying the history, and if you study the history of Miami, you can't help but study hurricanes, and then you realize, holy crap, there was a big hurricane in 1906. In fact, there were 2 that came right over downtown in 1906, a giant hurricane in 1926, and there were 4 hurricane threats in 1926. One was the devastating Great Miami Hurricane, and then you had 1935 and 1948 and 1950 and 1964. So you have all these direct hits right on downtown Miami, and I got to thinking, boy, if that starts happening again, I don't think we're ready for this. And so that's what got me into the hurricane thinking mode about, okay, what would we do if one of those hurricanes of the past, those great hurricanes that hit Miami in the past, came along again. And about that time, I was hired by the NBC station in Miami to be chief meteorologist. And so I went to them and said, this is what I think we need to do. They bought into the plan. They spent the money. And so when Hurricane Andrew came along, we were prepared. Yeah. But it really was that process of imagining that is the first step for everybody. I mean, everybody living in an apartment or a house, or somebody has a boat, or grandma lives at the beach, or whatever it is, you have to imagine what you would do before you actually make a plan, or what it would be like maybe even before you even imagine what you would do. Because we've lived through enough of these, I think, that most people can have that realistic vision of what could happen, especially if they kind of read up on hurricanes in their part of the coast that happened in the past.
But isn't that difficult for people to conceptualize what might happen to them when they do not have hurricane experience? You know, people move to the coast from inland locations, far inland, and they move and they retire to the coast and they don't have any hurricane experience. I remember when John Hope was alive, one of the things that he said was, unless you've experienced a major hurricane, you really have no idea of what it's all about. That you see it on television, you see it in news reports, documentaries, but unless you actually go through it, it is, and it's just, and we do this a lot, I think, with our own lives. You know, we look at our health, that we don't really pay attention to it until something bad happens. And, you know, you hear about things, you hear about hurricanes growing up or living on the coast. And I talk about this analogy a lot in my situation because I let my weight and my blood pressure get out of control, and I heard from people, bad things can happen to you. And, you know, you try to think, well, what I hear stroke and whatever, and I almost died, and it took that to get me to make changes. And so until you've been through those hurricanes, you really don't know what it's all about. And so that's an uphill battle, telling people, try to think about what you're going to do if this thing that we're telling you about comes one day that you've never been in. How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, I think that's certainly an issue. I mean, so many people are continuing to move south in general, and obviously most people move south, move to the coast,
right.
Or somewhere near the coast where hurricanes are a threat. But honestly, Mark, I think that there's a bigger group of people, a bigger problem related to people that have been through hurricanes, because most people at the coast have now had some experience with hurricanes,
True.
But they weren't right in the middle of it.
Right.
You know, in South Florida here, I still hear from people that say, yeah, boy, we went through Andrew in Fort Lauderdale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
right. That's not right. Exactly.
No. You have no conception, because in Fort Lauderdale they've had Andrew and Wilma and a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one, right, and Sonoma, but nothing really remotely comparable to what happened in the southern part of Miami-Dade County in Hurricane Andrew, as nasty as the experience in Wilma and Irma were, by the way, but just orders of magnitude, completely unrelated, different things. So those people, in my mind, are the hardest people to reach. People, when they move somewhere, you know, nobody moves to Florida and thinks, oh, I can never have a hurricane. So,
right.
You know, they're more receptive, I think, to information. The newbies are more receptive to information. Now, reaching them, that's a whole other issue. But generally, you know, they see there's a hurricane coming. Generally, they kind of seek it out, as opposed to the reflexive action of, I've been through it before, I know what to do, I know what to expect. That, in my experience, is the more intractable problem and the more difficult to deal with.
So how has preparedness changed and evolved since 1992 for the public? You could do an entire lecture series, I'm sure, about how it's changed just in the media and what you do there, but for the public and emergency managers, you know, we do live in a different world. There's so much information coming at us literally at the speed of light. I guess I could even, you know, have it as a double part question: that has preparedness changed that much since '92, and if so, how much and in what ways? 3 parts, really.
Yeah, so preparedness has changed dramatically since 1992, and a large part because of Hurricane Andrew and what happened here in Miami at that time on many different levels. What happened in terms of FEMA's preparedness, what happened in terms of the local governments and state government preparedness, and what happened in the media, right? All 3 things, because Andrew was sort of the first modern hurricane. I know folks in the Carolinas will say, wait a minute, it was Hugo just 3 years before. But the difference was that, for instance, every television station went off the air during Hugo, and only one radio station survived, so the media wasn't really affected in the same way. And also, the main effect of that was not in the city so much in a densely populated area. It was, north of Charleston. So Andrew ended up being a bigger hurricane with a smaller footprint. Sure. So it was much more intense, kind of a different level of event. Right. But from a governmental standpoint, across the hurricane zone, things changed as a result of that. And as in so many things related to hurricanes, here in Miami, they lead the way. So for now, when a hurricane is threatening here in this, very complicated, large, densely populated metropolitan area, the local government here doesn't screw around at all, ever, under any circumstances. They shut stuff down like they're blinking an eye. Where you see other places, there's a lot of him and hawing, and should we do it, and should we not, and should we wait, and what's going to happen, all that kind of stuff. Well, here, there's a culture at the governmental level of understanding that we're never going to know exactly what's going to happen, but we're not going to take a chance with such a complicated place of so many people that have to get in position, and the immense job of dealing with sheltering and evacuating and all these different things. I mean, if there's a threat, boy, everything is closed, and we go into hurricane mode here. Some of that is happening in other places on the hurricane coast, but not, in my experience, like here yet. But as more people, have more experience and kind of understand the pluses and minuses of being aggressive, then more of that's happening culturally. But here in South Florida, culturally, people understand that this is what we're going to do. We're just there's a hurricane threat. We're going to stop everything, get ready for the hurricane, and deal with it, and not try and do these halfway steps, which really is, it's what's got to be done. It's making those hard decisions, but culturally they can do it here. And I think that's harder in other jurisdictions.
Agreed. And it's interesting, the parallels from the get-go of what we're dealing with COVID-19. And, we're not going to really get into that because I'm not an epidemiologist, but the parallels are striking that we don't fool around with hurricanes. And when you were talking about that, I was like, it's interesting because there's amazing parallels, and we're just going to leave it at that.
I wrote a piece, actually. It was in the Washington Post in mid-March, kind of when the big kind of shutdown was just beginning, about all the different parallels related to hurricanes, a hurricane event, and the COVID event. And it started because I went to a grocery store here in my neighborhood, and at that time, this is when here in South Florida, which they were early here in shutting things down, relatively early, not early enough, but relatively early. And the mood in there, just the vibe, was a hurricane vibe.
Yep.
Everybody was very determined. What do I need? What am I doing? Everybody was very friendly, very courteous, just like before a hurricane. And so that kind of set me off to write a column about it, but it actually goes back farther than that. You're right, Mark. The parallels between thinking about it, having plans in place, and not being afraid to execute them, that has tremendous parallels to the coronavirus crisis.
Sure. So that word afraid, let's talk about that. That I often see people when I interact with them on social media talk about how fearful they are of hurricane season. I'm terrified of hurricane season. I'm terrified of hurricanes. Now, beyond the obvious, that I don't want to sound at all flippant, but what are people afraid of, and why do we look at hurricanes in such a fearful manner? They're not new. They've been with us since, settlement times. we now have the most warning for them than over any other natural phenomenon. The odds are overwhelmingly in our favor, and we are in so much control of it. And unlike coronavirus, you can see a hurricane coming on satellite and radar, and you can watch it on your phone. And so why this fear still that seems to consume people? They talk about, I have so much anxiety. And again, I try to understand it because I want to be able to connect with people and empathize with them. And that helps too with the messaging, that we do not overwhelm people and feed that fear. So where does that, I don't want to call it unnatural, but it's sort of unbridled fear sometimes. In your experience, where does that come from?
Well, I think it's hard to watch the pictures out of the Bahamas after Dorian or Hurricane Michael. You look at the Mexico Beach pictures that you know very, very well, and not to mention the rest, a good part of the Panama City area. And it's very easy to convert those images and retain those images if you live near the coast anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Because you go, oh my God,
that could happen to me.
Imagine if that happened here. Yeah. It's just kind of a natural reaction without really understanding what you said. Yes, it is very possible anywhere along the coast that a devastating hurricane could happen. The odds of it happening in any one year are very low.
Right.
And even if a hurricane is coming in your general direction, the odds of some devastating event happening in your part of the coast, even if it is affected, is relatively low. But it's certainly not zero.
Right.
And when we talk about the risk of something bad happening, we're really talking about the odds times the consequences.
Yeah.
And so even if the odds are pretty low, the consequences are, for most people in most cities, the more complicated the city, the more sophisticated the person's life is in terms of what they own, the consequences get super high. So the risk is actually tangible and significant, even if the odds are low. So it's not irrational to have fear of what could happen in a hurricane. The thing is, you can't let that fear overwhelm you so that you can't think, right? Because hurricanes, as you say, are wonderful in the sense that we know they're coming. They don't pounce. Now they can come pretty quickly, as we saw with Hurricane Andrew. It can happen, faster than we're used to, for sure. But they don't suddenly show up and hit. So if we have thought it out ahead of time and have reasonable plans, then first of all, we're going to be safe, because being safe in a hurricane, being physically, personally safe, is not that hard.
Right.
Now, taking care of your property, that's a whole other issue, depending on what property you have and where it's located and how it's built and whatever it is, how fragile it is, right? Those are two separate things. And a lot of times people conflate those, and a number of people that died, a handful of people died, a relative handful, 15 people died in Hurricane Andrew. Some of those people that died, and some of the people that die in most every hurricane, die because they're trying to take care of their property.
Right.
And it's often a boat, right? So, you want people to think that out ahead of time. A lot of people thought that out ahead of time and decided they're going to take the chance because the boat is too important, right, to their life or whatever.
Sure.
Not a rational thought after a point, for sure. But anyway, that if you have done the thinking ahead of time and have a reasonable plan, then you're going to get through it. Not that it can't be very bad and very uncomfortable and very annoying, but you're going to get through it, with your health at the very least.
Right, and that's the most important thing I think we can all agree with, is that, steps to preparedness, like we talked about here already, wrap your brain around it, educate yourself, understand what you're up against, know your vulnerabilities, and I think that helps. I talk about this a lot when I do my video discussions, that we fear what we don't understand, and I think that's a very common thing. And so the more we know, you would think, and this is the paradox here, that the more we know about it, the less we would fear it. But sometimes I think people don't want to hear it because it's just too much for them, and they let that fear overcome them. So what advice would you give to people, especially people that really are afraid, where they hear about it and they hear people discussing it, and it gets them to the point, and I know you're not a psychologist, but you've done this long enough that you might be able to offer some insight. Say, hey, look, I've broadcast about this, I've talked about it, I've studied it, I've been through it, whatever, a long time here. Let me give you some advice on how to quell that fear, put that fire down a little bit, not make it go away. You're not going to give anybody complete peace of mind, but Bryan, how can you just kind of turn down the knob a little bit on that fear?
So I think two ways. One is, like I said, to think about it now, right? Just to think about it. Just imagine. And it really comes down to 4 things to fundamentally think about. The rest of the stuff, it just kind of falls out. And the first one is, where are you going to be if a hurricane
makes sense?
Where are you and your family going to ride out the storm?
Yeah, to be safe.
That's a very fundamental question, right? And if the answer is, no, I'm okay at home, be sure that you're okay at home. And most people are okay at home. Most people don't live right at the beach where the ocean could rise up, or right along the water. Now in North Carolina, there are a lot of places, obviously, even where inland, that you've got to worry about, rising water. But there's also a lot of experience. So this is a knowable thing that you can kind of figure out ahead of time. Now, a lot of people say, I don't know, but I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, that's not an unreasonable thing if you have lots of money and you're willing to go take a vacation a number of times when in the end you won't have had to.
Yeah.
Because if you're really going to get out of here, you got to go early to either go to the airport and throw down the money that it takes to go somewhere and deal with all that, or you got to get in your car very early so you don't run the risk of getting trapped with other people looking for a hotel in Atlanta or something. Some kind of
we've seen it.
Difficult thing. But that is like that you don't need a storm, you don't need a hurricane to figure that out.
Right.
So that you can do. Number 2 is, how am I going to protect my property? Right. So depending on where you are and what your situation is, and do you have a boat, and how many cars, and how strong is your house, how about the windows, all those things come into that, because that can't be solved on the fly at the last minute.
Right, and it can't be solved with one booklet or one hurricane special. And that's what I try to get across to people, is that there's no forecast that's going to tell you exactly what's going to happen from an impact perspective for your address. Just like I can't tell you what preparedness looks like for every individual person and household or business, that it's different for everybody. And I think that's it's not necessarily a problem. It's just one of these things that it just is, and that is, we're told to prepare, but again, we go back to that basic question: what does that mean for me? And I turn that around and say, for the people watching, you need to ask that to yourself. Okay, what does that mean for me?
Yeah, so here in South Florida, it's not everybody for sure, but I would say most people understand what that means, understand what, preparing their lives physically, their physical property means. Now, a lot of folks don't have the money, don't have the resources, don't really have the time to think about it. I've lived a life right on the edge, and those people, thankfully here, we have some help for those people that doesn't exist in other places. But obviously there's a large population of people that tell them to get, to be sure they have the latest shutters on the house is just kind of a ridiculous thing to say. They live in an apartment and the landlord doesn't want to put shutters on the house. Well, okay, then, there isn't a good solution, except that you do have to take care of yourself and you take care of your property. So you do things like put your things in plastic bags and put the plastic bags in the tub. Yeah. For example, that stuff, right? There are things you can do to, if you have a kind of a plan ahead of time, or you have, in your closet, a few boxes of big, strong plastic, those black kind of bags, that goes a long way toward predicting a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Right? If that's all you do, and you put that at the top of a closet, and you put it in the bathtub, that's there's a lot you can do of that kind of thing. So, and then, Mark, one of the things that traps so many people after a hurricane is they haven't made plans for water.
Right.
And as you know, every time there's a hit of a hurricane, everybody goes to the grocery store and they buy every jug of water on the shelf. And that is such an incredible waste of time and money when, with a little bit of pre-thinking, like right now, if everybody is watching, we'll go on Amazon and order 5-gallon inflatable water jugs.
Yeah.
Then they just open the tap, they fill up the jug. You know, they're inflatable, so they just sit on the shelf. They're plastic jugs. They sit on the shelf, and then they load up on 30 gallons of water, and it sits on the kitchen floor, and there you go.
Right.
That's all
exactly.
you need to do, right? So thinking out having water, because after a hurricane, it's pretty easy to have food. You can have food bars, or you can have something, and that's not the problem. The problem is you got to have water.
You do,
because it's usually hot, and you got to have water. So, planning for water just saves so much aggravation after the storm, and allows you to concentrate on other things, that it's really a singular issue. And then the fourth thing out of 4 is communicating. Because even after Hurricane Irma here in South Florida, for example, many people had no cell phone service.
Yeah, tell me.
And had no internet service. So how are you going to communicate with your family or a town, let them know? And generally it comes down to, the bottom line is, somebody is designated in your family that lives in Indiana or something.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you can, you place a call to Indiana, to Aunt Mary, and say, just tell everybody I'm okay, my phone isn't working, but I'm okay. And then suddenly, if you've solved the problem, that people know you're okay, that you have a way to communicate, then the angst level is, drastically different after the storm, and you can go about your business more. But like I said, if you just take care of those 4 sets of thinking and very little actual buying, but do the thinking, then when a hurricane is a potential, it's 5 days out, it's whatever out, there's a system out there, that kind of thing, it makes the process so much easier. But there's another thing, Mark, and I think you, getting off what you said about when it's happening and how we communicate, I think another artifact of the modern world that we did not have in Hurricane Andrew, as a matter of fact, I said in my book, and I say it all the time, that it was easier to communicate with people in 1992 than it is today, because today, there's a million different opinions out there. You get information coming at you from every different direction. It can be conflicting. It can be unclear whether it's the same information or slightly different. It just can be, it's much more confusing. So what I seriously suggest people do is not listen to every fragment of information. Listen to credible sources, and including obviously the National Hurricane Center, local emergency management, and pick your sources. Don't try and listen to 10 different people. You're not going to know more. You're going to know less. Yeah. Especially if you go on social media or on Twitter and you get these little fragments of information without perspective, right? Because not all information is created equal. Some information is interesting but not relevant to the general threat that's happening. You can get your mind focused on the wrong thing, when almost always the only question is, do I need to prepare or not?
Yeah, really.
Right? That's all the details are not important.
It's true.
What really counts is, do I need to prepare or not? And so if you can get focused on that question, then the whole process is easier and your mind is clear when you're just trying to, get to the bottom line.
And this is what I thought would come out of this, that what we've learned is, in talking with Bryan today, is preparedness is very much a principle based on a mental capacity to understand the threat, understand what you have to do, and you have to do that first. If you can't mentally prepare and all that means, then the physical part and then the fiscal part, the spending money part, fiscal with an F, it really doesn't matter, because if you don't know what your game plan is, just like a coach is going to work everything out before the game, they don't just show up to game time and just hope everything works. Then you have chaos, and the same is true. And I think that's what people get lost, and they think that preparedness is money, stuff, lists that must be filled, buying water, buying bread, buying milk, buy. But then you, like the very simple thing that Bryan mentioned about water, for pretty much everybody in the Western Hemisphere that I know of, most of us can turn on the faucet and water comes out for, pennies per gallon. So there's no reason to go running off to Publix or Harris Teeter or Kroger or whatever the case may be and buying up all the bottled water in a panic. That gets your heart rate up, you're stressed. And I think that's so important, folks. Step one is the mental capacity of yourself to understand what preparedness means to you, your vulnerability to impacts, understanding what those impacts are, how they could affect you. And then from there, you can develop these plans of, all right, I've wrapped my brain around it. Now what am I going to do? And so that leads me to the next part of this. Preparedness means different things for different people. And I mean, that makes very good sense. And it's almost a rhetorical question, but then how do we boil it down to what do people do that are going to prepare a large family versus somebody that's single? It's different. And I think people need to, and there's also the preparedness of the infrastructure and the government and how all that starts to work in. So, and again, with your experience over the decades, and again, that's a good thing to say because you're racking up experience points. There's always pluses to getting older. How is preparedness different for different segments of our population, from young versus old to rich versus poor, people with families, people that are single, just starting out? That preparedness is not created equal is the simplest way to put it.
No, I mean, the bottom line, in most places on the hurricane coast that don't have a huge evacuation problem. Now, we're not talking about people living in New Orleans with a big hurricane coming, because everybody has no choice there but to get out, right? And if you live in a super vulnerable place like that, if you're on Cape Hatteras and there's a Category 3 hurricane coming, you're not going to stay on Cape Hatteras.
Right.
There are, lots of places on the coast that the first step is, like I said, is where are we going to be, and it's not going to be someplace where you can be drowned by the rising ocean water or the rising bay water or whatever the water near you happens to be, river water, whatever it is. So everybody is in that boat. But then when you get past that, then the people that are especially vulnerable are really vulnerable, right? So like here in South Florida, just in Miami-Dade County, I don't remember the exact number, but 100 or 200,000 people are electricity dependent.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So if they don't have electricity, they're in serious trouble.
Life-threatening. That's right. Right.
So this is a major problem, because this, even if they're not threatened with rising water in terms of forcing their evacuation, they still have to evacuate because they have to be in a place with a electricity supply that can't go out for more than X number of hours. Usually they have some sort of minimal battery backup at the very least. So, those people have a whole set of issues, and And this tends to apply to, families that have a disabled child, or people that have disabilities of all fashions. And unfortunately, in hurricanes, as you may know, we lose many more elderly people because they're reluctant to evacuate, which you totally can relate to. They live wherever they live, and they probably lived there a long time, and the idea of going someplace,
sure,
to another part of the city they don't know, maybe they don't thrive, whatever the issues are, they're more likely to stay, but they're also much more vulnerable. So again, it's a vulnerable population problem, and then you have to kind of deal with what you got. And it still comes down to, where am I and my family going to ride this out safely? In most houses, you can be safe inside the house, in a central location, away from the outside walls, in most situations outside of the evacuation zone. But you have to kind of know that, and you have to, evaluate your situation, and whether it's one person or whether it's a family of 5 or 8, you still have to be in a safe place and have thought out what your surroundings are when well before the storm arrives.
And you got to think about, what are you going to do afterwards? That's part of preparedness, that you survive.
Right.
And Bryan has emphasized this several times here, and I think that's a key takeaway, is that the number one goal is to keep you safe, whatever that takes to do. And so if that means you're at home, or if that means you evacuate, the commonality is you still have to deal with the aftermath, and that's not going to go away if there is an aftermath for you to deal with, if there are problems at your property. And so again, based on your experience, let's flip this around. And what are some mistakes that you've seen people make over and over again, not necessarily for preparing for the storm itself, but the aftermath? Where are people kind of screwing up that you could offer some advice that might set a light bulb off, that could really ease their, and it is painful to deal with that aftermath, because the aftermath can be a generation long if you think about it.
It can. Hurricane Andrew defined people's lives and divided people's lives into before Andrew and after Andrew.
Exactly.
People that went through it still to this day, 28 years later, still talk about it, their time before Andrew and after Andrew, very much like I think we'll talk about before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. This is going to be kind of like before 9/11 and after 9/11.
Yep.
This is going to be a society-changing kind of hinge event. So big hurricane events certainly have the potential to do that. Thankfully, these giant hurricane events that are life-changing and society-changing don't happen very often. But just to pick one that I see over and over and over again, and it can make such a difference after the fact, is to think out where you're going to park your car. Because if you don't have the car after the event, because it's flooded or a tree fell on it, or it's battered by the wind, it's flipped by the wind, whatever it is, that makes your life a whole lot different than being able to get in your car and go places and even leave town potentially once the roads are open and clear. So, like when you lead up to Hurricane Andrew, once I was kind of clear what direction the wind was going to come from, I was telling people, drive on your lawn and go up and park on the west side if you live in this part of the county. Park your car as close to the house as you can on the west side if you don't have any other safe place to put it, so that you would have a car after the fact. Now,
much better chance.
Obviously, parking garages are the best.
Yeah.
Like elevated parking garages here in South Florida, in Miami Beach, the city opens all of the city parking garages for free to residents. So, people can go and park in an elevated place, and parking garages are safe they're not just safe for cars, they're safe for people, actually.
Right.
The aerodynamics of parking garages are that the wind kind of goes around them. So anyway, thinking that out under the heading of protecting your property, it makes a tremendous difference. So we talked about water, and there are two components. I didn't mention the other component to water, Mark, which is the sanitary water. So water that you can flush the toilet. Very often the water system doesn't work, but the sewer system does, because the water system is more
the pump stations and
than
stuff.
The sewer system.
Right.
At least initially. So I just tell people to, when you're out buying things, buy one of those plastic sheets that painters use when they paint your house. They're cheap.
Yep.
Just have that on the shelf with your plastic water bottles, and then you put that in the bathtub and, fill up the bathtub 3/4 full, and then you'll have plenty of sanitary water to flush the toilet. And again, life will be a lot better after the hurricane if you can flush the toilet. It's a rule.
All right, now I'm going to challenge you a little bit. You've only got $20 to prepare for this hurricane. What do you do with it? So, and people, we're going to face that more and more, I think, especially this season, and we're going to get to that in a moment, but you got $20, maybe $40 between you and your significant other. All right, you got $40. How do you spend that $40 wisely? You're going to stay. You've realized I can stay. I'm not in an evacuation area. I'm not going to put my life at risk by staying. How do you spend that $40 the wisest?
I get plastic sheets and duct tape. And because you can just do a lot with that, both to, like I said, save water ahead of the storm, but protect things after the storm. And let me add to that, those big black 30-gallon bags to put stuff in, to put valuables in, to put photographs and pictures off the wall and computers and stuff like that in for during the storm. That way you've protected the key things that allow your life to go on, your paperwork and so forth. If you put that in plastic bags and put it on the top of the shelf, and you use if you have a dishwasher, the dishwasher is a great place to put things and that you can seal up that are valuable. Odds are the dishwasher is going to be, no matter what happens, the dishwasher is going to be a safe place. But some basic protective things, and then if you don't want to spend the money for the water jugs, just be sure that every pot and pan you have is filled with water, and cover it with plastic and tape it shut, and hide it so that you have water to drink.
Yeah, and I love it that he didn't say, you look for a store that has water that's 44 cents a gallon. Don't waste your money on that. For a lot of us, especially with what we're facing now in the economy, money is going to be tighter than ever before. And even with $40, you can spend that wisely and just thinking differently. And that's what comes from that experience that Bryan has seen, that, don't try to figure out how many gallons of water can I buy for that $40 or included in that. What's the budget of the $40 for water? For just a few dollars, you can get the sheet, like you said, for a bathtub, and a bathtub will hold 70 gallons. I don't know. It's a lot. And so that's brilliant.
Well, the bathtub should be for sanitary water. So you take a pot and you scoop it up and you put it in the toilet, and it allows you to flush the toilet. Or if you have to wash yourself, you can dump it over top of you, whatever. But then you need some kind of containers, whether they're old milk jugs or whether they're old soda bottles or whether they're pots and pans. That you just fill with water from the tap.
Yeah, and you need about a gallon per person per day, typically, and within a few days, depending on where you are and how severe it is, hopefully things with relief efforts. Again, that's a whole other dealing with aftermath. We could do that for hours. But all right, so we've tiptoed around it, and we just cannot ignore the fact that we are in a changed world now. After the very first part of March, roughly March 10th and 11th, to me, that's when it really changed. That's where this panic seemed to set in. NCAA tournament canceled, NBA season canceled, this is canceled, that's closed, this is closed. Outer Banks, Dare County, you know Dare County.
Yeah, sure.
They closed. They were one of, if not the first county in the nation that just zipped it up in March, and it's still zipped up. And so anyway, it just came in kind of a rush, it felt like, and we're never going to be the same again. It's going to take a long time. We have the potential for a very busy hurricane season, but even if there was the potential that it's going to be a lackluster season with very few storms, it only takes one, as we know, and I know that's so cliche, but it's so important. Have you thought about what are we going to do if, in a hurricane situation, how are we going to deal with this? I've tried to think about it from going out in the field, and at least the unmanned cameras that I have are, the definition of social distancing from hurricanes. Hey, been ahead of that curve for 15 years, but seriously, people are concerned, and I see it on social media when I tweet anything about hurricanes. They're like, oh, great, a pandemic and a hurricane. So honestly, Bryan, what are we going to do? And we have to start addressing this because we're about 30 days from the start of the season. We can't ignore it.
Well, right. So I think that two things. First of all, I think things in 30 days from now, it's about 30 days, will change in the sense that I think that there will be some hotels opening and so forth. Because the big issue, it really is, how do you evacuate? How do you shelter, right? That's really the big issue. And I think the answer to that fundamentally is everybody's going to wear masks. But that's going to be it. You're going to,
well, we got to have them.
You're going to wear masks and you're going to have hand sanitizer. So everywhere you go, every hotel you go into, if they have shelters, all throughout the shelter, there'll be hand sanitizers and masks.
It's got to be available, though. People have got to be able to have access to it, so I sure hope it's available.
Yes. Well, I'm being perhaps optimistic, but obviously, for it to have a really significant hurricane, odds are we have more than a month, right?
Right.
Odds are we have 3 months at least or so. So, in any case, that's what I think will happen in 2019 is that it's going to be hand sanitizer and masks, and they pretty much, because we use kind of every system that we have to respond to a hurricane. It's not like we have things on the shelf that we haven't been using, and now we're going to roll them out because we have COVID on top of it. So I think we got to use basically the same system, but overlay on it, some
that.
And I suspect that what will happen by then is, we'll just all feel better about, have been going around in masks for long enough, that we'll just feel better about the fact that we've been doing that, we haven't gotten sick, it's working, the science that says that if everybody's wearing a mask, it's good. If we tend to try and keep distance, it works. And we'll just feel better about that, and that will allow us to do what needs to be done. And I think hotels will open up. And again, the only way they open up is you go into the hotel with your mask on, there's hand sanitizer there. You go to the room, there's hand sanitizer there. You just take the steps that really you ought to do, whether you're going home or you're going to a hotel room when you go out.
Well, one of the things, and I like what you said there about, and let's be optimistic that we don't have to deal with a hurricane threat at all until August. And we'll presume, for the sake of argument, that it's not until late August, that by then, hopefully, conditions will improve even more and we'll be at a different place, sure. So that being the case, like you said, we would have had experience, a lot more, some areas it's mandatory that you wear masks. There's going to be fines, etc. And it's just this cascade of newness that we're dealing with. So to that end, I've been pushing, when I talk about seasonal forecasts, we're seeing conditions favorable for more, instead of just, oh, the hurricanes are coming, everybody be scared. I've never been that way to begin with, but I'm tempering it even more with, but you know what? We have experience with hurricanes. there are very few people alive that were alive in the last pandemic, 1918. And so I can understand more this community fear, this collective fear that we've all had, and it's been out of control in some instances. But the hurricane situation, would you agree with me that we've been here before? Let's act like we've been here before. We know hurricanes. Let's use that to our advantage. Even now, more so than ever, because layered, like you said, on top of it, is the COVID-19 issue. Don't let that compound it. Use the experience of our hurricane history to our advantage. I think that's a wise way to approach it. It's not denying that hurricanes, it's truly, hey, we're up against, it's like a basketball team. I'll let you speak. I promise I'll shut up. But I get passionate about this, that you're down, your coach doesn't come out and say, that's it, we're going to lose, forget it, we're walking away. And we've seen some amazing comebacks. New England Patriots over, right, 28-3?
Over Seattle, yeah.
So, or Atlanta in that case, right? So I'm just saying.
Atlanta in that case, yes.
Boy, either gain or lose. But it's the sports and meteorology stuff is real, folks. Like the analogies, it works. Let's use our game experience from the past to help us through this season, because it is different, because we do have a pandemic on top of it.
Yeah, so we have to use good sense. And a lot of this is people kind of getting used to this new version of life, with the reality of the unknowns of the virus. And so some of those unknowns will become more known. And now
Sure.
I just predict, I'm not an epidemiologist, I don't know anything about viruses, but I just predict that we're going to get used to this mask business for a while, and just feel confident, because after you've done that for a few months and you've been around people in the supermarket, keeping a reasonable distance, but generally you've gone to the supermarket, generally you've done some things in life, maybe your barbershop is back open again and you're doing it with masks and everybody's kind of being a little careful, and people around you aren't getting sick, that there'll just be more confidence that we can live.
I like that. And that's what I'm talking about with the hurricanes. Let's use that same confidence for hurricane season.
Right, it doesn't change the realities of a hurricane, and I just think by the time we get to having to deal with that, if we do have to get to deal with that,
right.
that we're going to be farther down this COVID road to where we'll have just more kind of personal confidence that,
right.
that we've gotten through it. We have a way to get through it.
And I do. I think that the same is true in any hurricane season, but especially this one, with so much riding on it that people think that they keep saying, what's next? It's funny how all this has been going on, and then the government says, oh, by the way, there's evidence of UFOs. That just kind of got thrown out there.
Yes.
Any other year, that would have been the top thing, but okay. But
Although I had seen some version of that video before, so
right.
I'm not sure exactly why that was.
Weird timing, but let's
totally unfamiliar. Yes, you're right.
Right. 2020 has nothing against us. I know it may seem that it does. It's just coincidence, I hope. But for real, folks, we as a nation, all the way back to settlement times, and we look at hurricane history, we've dealt with hurricanes in this country, and that hasn't changed. And so I feel like, let's use that to our advantage. Bryan's experience, down at his station at WPLG in Miami, that voice of reason and explaining things, all of that matters. And it matters even on the level of the people watching, that, we have been through hurricane season before. And I'm not saying it's easy. It doesn't make it so that you get a free pass. But instead of freaking out that hurricanes are now somehow different, they're going to be the same, whether or not there's COVID-19 is my point. And so let's use that to our advantage. So anything you want to add that we didn't go over, a piece of advice, anything that before I let you go here, and I do appreciate you spending this hour with me. all of us.
Well, I think that people are better able to be good hurricane citizens if they understand about the hurricanes of the past where they live, and they just imagine, okay, if the hurricane is coming, what am I going to do? And they do that well in advance. They do that when they can be calm about it. They can do that. Hurricanes are indeed part of life. I used to say, living along the coast means living with hurricanes, and there's nothing to do but to be prepared.
Simple as that. I like that.
It's just, the sky is blue, and hurricanes will affect the coast at some point in some way.
That's true.
So, we just have to deal with it, and we have to be real about it. And the more we think about it in advance, the better the experience is if it happens in your area. It's the bottom line.
That is right, and that we can't escape that. And again, just summarizing, letting fear consume you to where it almost paralyzes you that you don't even want to talk about it. Don't do that, because that could lead to some very big problems. But at the same time, we talked about these very simple things. With just $20, $40, $60, you can do a lot to keep yourself ready, that it doesn't take tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're in that position, sure, you can do mitigation strategies to your property. But again, that's a story for another day. So there you go. Well, that's our time is up, as they say. So you talked about, so let's go over the website again. So it's Hurricane Intel, like Intel the processor, or intelligence, right? HurricaneIntel.com. I'll put the link in the description of the video. So again, what are you trying to do with HurricaneIntel.com, and what does it do now, and where do you think it's going to go?
Well, Hurricane Intel came from my own experience of when a hurricane is out there, or a storm is out there, a tropical storm, tropical depression, whatever it is, and the Hurricane Center puts out a new advisory. In order to get a sort of reasonable picture of what it is, you have to look at the public advisory, and you have to look at the discussion, and you have to look at the graphics, and you have to look at this variety of things clicking around on the website, right? That's just what you have to do. So I got there thinking, wait a minute, why don't I take that stuff from the National Hurricane Center, combine it into a graphic that's easy to understand and gives you an overview. Now, this isn't the end-all be-all of information if the storm is really threatening, but as you know, most advisories come out for storms that aren't threatening. You just want to kind of keep up and keep informed.
Intel, like you said,
so we create this graphic. It's on there every time the Hurricane Center puts out a new advisory package. It aggregates the key information into one graphic, and the system automatically tweets it, and it also puts it on HurricaneIntel.com. Atlantic systems and Pacific systems and Central Pacific systems near Hawaii. It does all of that on the same website.
And did you code that yourself?
No, I designed it. But I had a couple of different friends do the coding.
I know how it is.
Designed the upgrade to it to actually provide even more robust information, kind of in an easy to get to form. The idea is to make it easier to be informed of the latest information.
Is this one still in print? The Hurricane Almanac, is that on Amazon still?
Yeah, I think it's on Amazon.
I'll check.
That one.
It's a while ago.
Which maybe they'll show you. I can't see.
Oh yeah, sorry, turn the camera
on. That one, like I said, some of the information in there is not no longer valid because times change, right?
Right.
This one, the Hurricane Andrew, my Hurricane Andrew story, that one is there. People write to me that they just got it and they just read it and it felt relevant to them, and it's really about I'd say 40% or so about broadcasting. It's about communicating and the process that we went through at the television station to be ready for the hurricane. And a lot of that was mental.
There it is again.
It wasn't just making, physically doing it. It was figuring out what we would do if, and then making a plan, and then implementing it. Right?
Perfect.
So it was the thinking. So I tried to lay out the thinking to help people especially in the communications business, apply it to their situation today.
Very good. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. So that'll wrap up this conversation. Again, I think it's just good to just delve into the minds of these different experts on different aspects we've been talking about. And Bryan's experience over the decades is really something to take away and to learn from. And, just again, kind of simplifying things, that it is a mental state, very first and foremost. Before you go spend the money, before you go take action, you have to think about it. You got to put that brain of yours, all of you, to use. So again, I've talked about this before. This is possible, this Hurricane U, because of our patrons on Patreon. I want to thank them. Crowdfunding, like public radio, we do the same thing here, and it's wonderful. So thank you, patrons, for making this available to everybody. And it's a learning tool. There's lots of this stuff going on. The National Tropical Weather Conference, Alex Garcia and the folks behind that, Alex and them, Bryan, they're doing a very similar thing. Yeah. Because the National Tropical Weather Conference was canceled because of this virus. And so lots and lots of learning opportunities on the web, a very good side of the internets, as they say, and the use of social media. In the coming weeks, Hurricane U will continue on through the month of May, and then it'll be hurricane season. We will eventually talk about, yes, insurance. I know that's going to seem boring, but I'm going to figure out a way to make it not boring, because it is extremely important to understand insurance, and we have to address that. Trust me, you want to hear about that. And we're going to talk about hurricane hazards, actually understanding the impacts, and what Bryan talked about aggregating these products from the National Hurricane Center. We're going to talk about each of those products and what they mean and how you can make use of them, things like hurricane local statements, all of that to come in future live broadcasts of Hurricane U. All right? Look forward to it. Bryan, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Enjoy the cool weather down there in Miami while it lasts. Relatively cool anyway. I will talk to you all next week. Thanks for joining in. I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll see you next Wednesday on another edition of Hurricane U.